So I'll call to order this special meeting of the Urbana I.D.O.T. Traffic Stop Data Task Force. It is Friday, June 26th. Do you have names to call a roll? Or we can just go around the table and say our...
No, I'll grab that from Tony.
Let's just go around the room, say our names for the record. So, Alejandra, you want to start?
Yes, Alejandro Coronel.
Paul Testa.
Patricia Avery.
Pete Resnick?
Eric Jacobson.
Okay, so that's 5 of us. That does not constitute a quorum, so we'll continue the meeting informally from this point, and if we get a quorum, we'll go back and do some of our more official duties. So I just wanted to bring you up to date on a couple of little things. Got a message this morning from Nicole. She's had to go in for a small medical procedure, but it means that she hasn't been able to collect together yours, Andy's, and her notes into a report. So she sent me her stuff. I've got yours and Andy's. This weekend, I'm gonna, hopefully with Chandra helping me a bit, I'm gonna work that together into a report of some sort. As the police procedure public engagement section. One of the things that I did want to sort of reassure everybody, so we're putting out our initial report for public comment right now. Mm-hmm. So we're going to come back to edit in those public comments at the end of the public comment period. So this is not our final report, whatever we produce by Tuesday. Mm-hmm. So we have a chance to add on to it to take those public comments into account, and so we've got some wiggle room here, which is why I've not been in full-out panic about, okay, is everybody bringing stuff?
Feeling panicked.
So we'll get the stuff together as we can. One of the things that I'd like to do in the report that we're putting out now, this initial report, is to ask the city council. Right now we have 30 days of public comment period. Mm-hmm. What I'd like to do is ask the city council to extend that at some level for our convenience, to give us a little more time to fit stuff together. But I think more importantly, right now that 30-day comment period will end us on July 30th. Mm-hmm. With half the community out of town.
Right.
July is not a good one.
Right, and August, for that matter, half of which, people are out. My inclination is to ask the city council to give us until September so that the university is back in session, so that if folks from the university need to submit their comments, we'll at least give them some time to do that. Mm-hmm. And then submit our final report to the city council after that. Eric, do you think this will fly?
I would think so. I would think so. I mean, it's very reasonable. It's absolutely true that things really slow down. Things slow down on the council too. Partly for the reason that you've cited, and partly for the reason that our fiscal year
of course.
Begins on July 1. So we've just gone through a period of pretty intense activity with respect to revenue ordinances, budget ordinances, being sure those balance, arguing about priorities and such like that. So the council tends to we meet through the summer, but the agenda tends to be relatively light, and so it's sort of congruent with the and I think that a longer public comment period is also I think it's also consistent with our mission. I mean, I think that we really want to represent the community as broadly as we can. So, I think we want everybody. I think it makes sense that everybody in the community can feel that they've had a chance to sign off on this, to have input into it, and so forth.
So procedure, and do you have an impression that there's anyone on the council at this point who would be uninclined to vote for such a thing?
No, I mean, I don't know, there are a couple of people whom I find a little bit unpredictable, but, which is not necessarily a bad thing.
Right.
And again, we're speaking on the record.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Right, yeah, that's why one of the reasons I added that that's not necessarily a bad thing. But I mean, I think it's the right thing. And
Oh.
I think that, I think that the argument, the correct argument for it is that it really ensures that the report will represent broadly the understanding and the interests of the community.
That was my feeling as well. Okay, so what I think, if everybody's comfortable, just to get a sense of this group, and and we should talk about meeting next week. If everyone's comfortable, I will put some sort of cover letter on the report. You know, this is our draft for public comment, and we ask the city council to extend the public comment period. Are people comfortable with September 1st or something like that?
So that, people would be back, at that point, people would have been back, if they've gone away, they would have been back for about 2 weeks.
Has they,
So it's probably okay. Let's propose that, and then let's see what the council says. I can't imagine, my guess is, you know, if the council does anything, I might think that they might want to extend it longer rather than cut it off. But, and Paul, you're not gonna, like, graduate and leave us between now and
I
September.
wish. No, I'll be here.
Okay.
So I think that, yeah, no, I think the argument for that is very, very good. It also gives the council a chance. I mean, we'll give the council something, and they can come back. They can, you know, make sure that their particular constituencies see a draft of the report. They can
Exactly.
circulate it by emails, and it gives them, you know, maybe if we can engage them in helping to get public comment, as well as their own responses to it.
Right.
I think that's, you know, it sounds really like the right thing, absolutely like the right thing.
Anyone uncomfortable with that proposal, or is everybody good?
No, but when we think about what Eric's comments are in terms of the council possibly just looking at it and giving us more time instead of less time, I was wondering why we only are giving like that window, that two-week window.
So,
Why wouldn't we just go push it out to the end of September?
Well, actually, that was what I was thinking as I was talking.
Yeah.
And so I actually think the end of September.
so saying September 30th?
Yeah, September 30th, because, you know, people are getting, they're getting their kids back in school, they're getting, which really is a big impetus to get civically engaged, to
Yes.
start to bring their thoughts back to the community.
That's right.
As opposed to, you know, summer activities and summer travels
Okay.
and whatever.
I will put that down in the cover letter, and hopefully when we meet next week to vote this thing out,
Right.
everybody will be on board with that. We can always change it on the floor if we need to, but September 30th is okay with me.
Just how does this process for public comment work? Is it just it's available online and people can? Because it seems like if we're pushing the deadline to September, we have some time to maybe try and hold another town hall or formally reach out and.
We do have a chance to hold another town hall, and at that point,
That's
the document will be there. There may even be a record of public comments. I mean, we might, for example, put up something like a wiki and invite people to comment online, should they choose to do that. Now, people may not wish to comment publicly, they might wish to, you know, they could have an email link to, and which I think we should probably assure them would be, you know, that we're not gonna reveal anybody's identity or connect anybody's comments to their identity. They certainly are, if they choose to comment publicly, great. If they choose to comment semi-anonymously, where we would hold the identity confidential, I think that's fine too.
Okay. Yeah, why don't we,
I think I said something that triggered a
the city
thought
council's
about
gonna
that.
meet in 2 weeks. I think a lot of this is gonna depend on
July 13th.
the approval thereof of this.
Right, yeah.
So why don't we make the suggestion of September 30th, see what the city council says. If the city council says, yes, let's do that, then let's look into getting this more interesting public comment since we have some time to work with.
Right.
If the city council shortens that, then obviously we're gonna have to maybe skip some of the more interesting ways to do public comment. Todd, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so as we were doing some canvassing work just to try and get additional surveys and try to make up for the surveys
Right.
that have been misplaced, one of the things that became very apparent was that there are individuals who have a lot to say and who have various, very, very strong opinions who will never come to a public forum. And I think it would be very important to do some type of canvassing activity that reaches out to those individuals. If no other reason than to let people in the most impacted neighborhoods know that this is something that the city cares about, that it's something that the city is thinking about and looking at. Because just that understanding, and the one guy in particular that we talked to, just having that understanding seemed to cause a shift in his understanding of his relationship with his city.
That's great to hear. I assume in a positive way.
Yes, I can't tell you how much that impressed me and impressed upon me the need to actually be in the community and do the canvassing. Now, I will tell you, the survey tool that we have is not necessarily optimal for having those conversations. There were several times where you would have to go back and restate and explain a question. That obviously is not ideal for a survey.
Yeah, that survey, I mean, we designed to have available at the community
Yeah,
forum
for the
at the town
purposes
hall
of that
Right.
because we were going to have those conversations and give people that opportunity.
But-
doing one-on-one canvassing, we probably want to come up with a different set of questions.
Yeah, and probably covering the same ground just in a slightly different way. But I would strongly encourage the committee
To do that.
to do that, to take the time to do that on a couple of occasions. I'm not so much concerned about the data as I am about the outreach potential, because there are people who are really quite frustrated about, particularly in the certain neighborhoods where it seems that these stops are occurring more frequently,
Mm-hmm.
and the feeling that just as a result of having to drive in and out of their neighborhoods while they're going to work or doing whatever every normal, boring person does, they're incurring these stops on
Right.
at a higher rate.
I think that sounds like a fabulous idea.
So do you think the canvassing should be freestanding, or do you think it might be an idea to link the canvassing to the Walk as One, the Community Coalition Walk as One events?
I would decouple those two.
You would decouple them?
I mean, I think this is Urbana's attempt
Okay,
to hear the voice of a particular portion of its community that may
That's right.
never come to a meeting.
who
And I totally support the Walk as One concept, but this is a slightly different
okay.
initiative.
Although we can incorporate some of the information that goes out with the Walkus One. We just had a Walkus One yesterday.
Right.
You were there, Eric,
Right.
where we delivered bags with information. If we, which I talked to Todd about this, I like the idea of doing a canvassing 101, knocking on the doors. I'd like to be a part of that, and I know
Sure.
that staff has been a part of it.
Yeah.
But I like to be a part of that as well.
Mhm.
And because I don't fully believe that I've gotten what I need to give a good report.
Okay.
And I like the idea of really hearing from the individuals. Even though I thought our town hall meeting went well, I thought Sam Smith did a fine job of facilitating the meeting. I still felt like there was a lot of information that it was a small group of individuals that we got feedback from, and now we don't even have the information from the surveys from that town hall. But so I think going out to canvass the community, in particularly the areas where we know that there's an increase in stops, and talk to the folks directly, I think is a wonderful idea. And so I can tell you right now that the impact committee, and I haven't gotten Alejandra's, where did she go? She left.
Snuck out.
Okay, I'd like to get her feedback
Sure.
as a part of this report, and we haven't got it done.
But I think this sounds spot on, that this will add so much to that section.
I think so.
And as part of getting the public feedback on our work, I think this sounds like a great idea.
So the thing that I want to say is, even the report that goes to council, we want to make sure that we do disclose that in terms of the impact committee is, we're not done with our work.
Right.
And that's outlined in the report.
Yeah, so
I know this isn't a final report, but
No, but this is, you're right. I will make clear in our cover letter, I was certainly going to say, this is the draft report that we're putting out for public comment, but adding, we have every intention during public comment to do additional canvassing, direct canvassing of communities to get their feedback and to be able to add to the public impact, the public impact section.
And I apologize, I think I'm gonna have a lot more time. My organization it's in the throes of imbalance right now. Because we're at the end of the fiscal year, we don't know the fate of the organization going forward because we're state funded and we just got vetoed. So we're right in the middle of doing a lot of reporting, a lot of praying. but we're just in flux right now, and we've been that way for a few minutes. So I apologize that I haven't had a lot of work. I haven't done a lot of work on my report. I've got a lot of information, and I've got to pull in a lot of pieces together, but I think I've said that I really want to submit the best report that I can, because this work is important, and there's been a lot of work that has gone into it. And when you think about how much work this committee has done over the year, I appreciate the fact that we will at least give the public 2 or 3 months and maybe not even, a couple months to digest what we've come up with, and then come back to us. And I even like the idea of them taking the report by sections and commenting where they feel the strongest, where they feel the strongest about, and having them, even if they would, write down, their comments. So
Good.
Alejandra, and I also say that if you, Alejandra, would work on submitting your comments on the impact committee, if you had comments that you would like to submit,
I sort of I submit my comment. I don't know,
Yeah, so there was some stuff
I did see it.
in her
Some of
report
her
here that
other
is, I think, direct on the community impact as
Okay, well,
opposed
I
to
haven't-
the police procedure, community engagement section. So,
Okay.
that is a combination, but I mean, I'm more than welcome if you wanna tell me what in a specific is the information that you're looking for.
Well, I think when we were I don't know if you were in the room when we were talking about canvassing the community. I think,
I mean, right now, when you were mentioning.
yeah, we
Well-
were just talking about it. I think you were out in the room.
Yes, I was here. I heard about the experience that.
Okay, so what I was thinking is that if we are specifically targeting, looking at our target population, driving population, our Latinas and our African American drivers, who are the ones that are most impacted by the study, I think that that's where we need to, you can help with that. Because there may be, if we're creating a survey, Todd, I think it has to be culturally competent, that survey, and I think Alejandra can help us in developing, if there's might be some language barriers or whatever, we do need to reach out to that population as well.
And I think
And
we have full
get-
capability to do so.
So one of the questions that I have is how to refer to the various groups. That is, should it be African American or Black? Should it be Latino or Hispanic? Should
Oh,
it
in our-
be white or European American? And in my mind, I mean, none of these expressions that I just said are pejorative, but people are sensitive to that. And actually, I would suggest that, members of each group, nominate their own names, because I think it's really important for people to be able to name themselves. But we should be, I think, consistent, we should try to be consistent throughout the report and to use the terminology that is the most well accepted within the group.
So, right now, Paul's section, and I only pick on him because he's written the most text of the bunch of us. Paul's section has used African Americans, Hispanics, and Caucasians, I believe.
And why?
And, yeah.
And you also use white on. So,
I was thinking about African American and Black. Some African Americans rather be called Black.
Yeah.
So, I mean.
I think they're somewhat interchangeable.
And
So I
I think the formal term is African American, but then sort of a shorter abbreviated version.
And I think for purposes of the report, we probably want to be as formal and official sounding as we can get away with without being offensive by any particular use of
So-
term. So Paul, was
I
there a
guess-
particular?
No, there was no conscious decision. I think like one tack we might take is say we're just going to adopt the language used by the state and say this is what the state, when discussing these data,
Uh-huh.
you
And
uses these
what
terms.
is the language adopted by the state?
We should
Okay.
look, but I think that could be the
Yeah.
framework.
So whatever is the language in the I.D.O.T. report, we can adopt that.
But
Yeah.
although I too am open to saying, or we could say this is what the state does, but we believe there are reasons to,
Yeah, let's just have a footnote explaining
Yeah.
whatever we do, let's have a footnote explaining.
Look at
But
my
I like-
driver's,
I
let me
like
look at
to-
my driver's license and
I
see
like
how
to-
they, I don't even know
Your
how it's
suggestion.
being.
I think that by what the state does, because I don't wanna be the one who pick how
Right.
to be called,
Okay, don't even put it on
because
there.
I mean,
yeah.
there are people who like to be called Latino, there are people who like to be called Hispanic. And,
I know
They
many
don't
friends
mind.
who insist on Chicano.
and yeah, so there is a lot, and
Yes.
so I think Paul's suggestions about going to the state terminology, it will be
Okay.
Yeah.
Why don't you take
something
a
that
look?
I will.
Take a look at the I.D.O.T. report, collect together what their terminology is. We'll pass it around and make sure that we're consistent with that. If anyone has any concerns about that, let us know.
Do we have a driver license already?
No,
Th-
it's not.
she was-
It's
no,
not.
it's not.
I was just looking to see, I guess,
I don't think so.
Yeah, just
it
your
was-
face, but
your
not
face, just the
Yeah.
face.
You're high and weight, that's all.
I didn't wait.
So,
Height, weight, face.
You know, I just got my driver's license
Yeah,
renewed, so I was just looking at it. I just got it renewed.
I just wanted to refocus us because I know, Alejandro, you said you have to leave at 1. So I want to make sure that we go over a little bit about the police procedure section before you leave, and make sure we're all on the same page and continue on the community impact until you have to go. With the yeah, go ahead, I'm sorry.
And also, I want to say, I mean, next week I will not be here
Oh, at all?
at all.
Okay.
I'm gone. But
When-
I will say that I come back, on the 6th.
Okay.
So, but I will say that I vote, I mean, for whatever the majority
So-
decide about when.
I guess one question is, will you have email access? Would you like me to send you what I've got after the weekend on the community impact, on the police procedure stuff, to at least give you a
Oh.
chance to glance at it and say, yeah, that looks about okay?
I have access to my phone, so.
Okay, so I'll send you email on that and make sure, because it sounds like, yeah, I hope Nicole is on the mend by next week, but she might be unavailable. So I want to at least, even if we were to have a quorum and everybody votes, I want to at least get a hint that everybody else is okay with this. So
Sure.
I'll plan on sending out by email what Chandra and I get together and make sure that you can at least say close enough for the draft.
Okay.
With regard to that section of the report, so I know Alejandra saw, because she's part of the subcommittee, Nicole sent me, did you print those out, what Nicole
Yes,
sent?
there should be no printer.
Nicole sent her summary of what she wanted our recommendations to be. I wanted to go over that a little, make sure that we sort of had an idea that this was the way forward, and then Chandra and I will work on what we will hopefully approve next week.
Thank you.
Daryl, did you grab a copy of everything that's up here?
No, I'll grab one.
Please.
Yeah, I'll take one of these on.
And what I'm on this, why don't we go down to the things that I'm most interested in, the last 2 pages, the last 3 pages of what you just got handed, section E, her final recommendations. And let's just give a quick read through, and like I said, I know Alejandra, you've seen this before. One of the things that I'll point out up front, just sort of structurally, which I mentioned to Nicole, and she thought this was a good idea. Nicole put it in the form of, the city council must, capital must, do this, should be required, capital required to do that. And one of the things I said to her was, we're an appointed body by the city council. We have been given by resolution authority. We don't need to structure our comments this way with demands. We're saying to the city council, this is what you ought to do. If you don't do those things, you don't do them at your own peril. And with the idea that the community will tell you exactly why you failed to do these things and what the problem with that is. So my feeling was, just language-wise, because of our position of authority, we can just state our recommendations straightforwardly, and I think it actually has more power that way.
Regardless of that, so we're not gonna have any capital letters.
I don't think so. I think we're just gonna say, here are our recommendations. The city council should do this, the police department should do that, these statistics should be collected, just very straightforward, simple language, because I think we're in a position to we are the task force. You told us to investigate, you told us to come up with recommendations. Here's what we're saying to do. If you don't do them,
That is.
that's your
up to
problem,
them.
and the voters might tell you that it is a problem, but, you know, as the appointed body, this is what we're telling you should be doing.
Yeah, that was something that I was concerned about because
And-
I really think that it's important that we, as you said, we are providing the information and the recommendation, but the funding, but really, me reading sometimes things in capital letters or underline or in bold, I think that by reading, you can actually understand what is bold and what is.
And, you know, one of the comments I made to Nicole on this topic was a community member coming to the city government and saying, here are our demands. I think it's appropriate to yell those things, right? There's a person who's not in a position of authority saying to the person in authority, hey, you really need to do this. And I think using bold and capital and everything in those circumstances is appropriate. We're not in that position. I think it comes off as much stronger if we just simply state what it is that they should do.
Okay.
So, in any event, and I've summarized some
Well,
of...
and I don't want it to have an adverse effect. And sometimes when people, when you're demanding, you come across as demanding.
Right.
Sometimes people dig in and take positions where otherwise they wouldn't, when you're poking fingers. So I think that her points are well taken, but I do think that the language can be softened a bit. I think,
Yeah.
as long as we don't lose the
Absolutely.
the point of she's trying to.
I've summarized many of these recommendations in my little four-page thing that you also have. But I was planning on leaving the details of it for the detailed section on police procedure, public engagement. So I'm going to take these, I'm going to take the information from Andy's report and from Alejandra's report and combine them into a set of here's what we found and here are what we think are good recommendations. Any particular comments on these as you've gone through them?
Yeah, the next to the last one on
Page 6?
5.
Oh, page 5?
Next to
Okay.
the last one on page 5. And so I think there's a difference between being stopped and being ticketed. And it's, I don't know if it wants to be elaborated in this section, but it should be elaborated somewhere in the report. I believe that, I don't know, but I think the evidence that I've read suggests that increased stops in high crime areas reduce crime. On the other hand, not all stops have to result in tickets. So I'm going to guess, although Nicole's not here, that she chose her words very carefully to say tickets rather than stops. And I agree with that. The difference between ticketing and stopping, and because the tickets should be, we don't have any evidence. All the evidence suggests, in fact, otherwise. We have no evidence that people the only ethnicity difference in terms of who drives dangerously is that Asians drive less dangerously than everybody else. But there doesn't seem to be any difference between whites, Hispanics, and African Americans as far as dangerous driving. So there shouldn't be any difference in tickets. But increased stops in high crime areas do seem to reduce crime. And so I wouldn't make a point of it in the recommendations, but I would make a point of, I would make that distinction. elsewhere in the report.
So in my, I'm sorry,
Where's the statistics that back up that? Is that factual?
the safe
That-
driving issue?
That more stops increase safety?
In reduced crime rates.
Well, reduce crime rates.
Yeah.
So that's in one of the papers that I cited, which is a review of other papers on what's called hotspot policing. And more, aggressive policing, more investigation in high crime areas does seem to reduce crime in those areas.
One of the things that I put in my section on recommendations, which speaks to this, and the last three of my summary recommendations, I take the point about ticketing, I noticed that as well and stuck on that. But the last one on my list of recommendations reads, the police department should regularly review crime statistics to assure that any differences in police tactics are justified by significant reductions in crime rates as compared to the negative impact such tactics have on communities where they are used. And I think, as I read Nicole's recommendations and the bit about that, yes, if you flood an area with police and stop everybody, you do reduce crime rates. If you do it to an incredible rate, you result in a horrible place to live, and with horrible impacts. You are now in a police community or a police state. So there's a balance to be made, and I think the police department and city council need to be aware that they're making a balance. Yes, you dump a bunch of police resources into an area and start stopping everybody, there is some likelihood that the crime rate's going to go down. You're going to make people's lives in that area miserable. You're going to impact them financially, you're going to impact them in just all sorts of horrible ways. You're going to increase the possibility of a tragic incident happening. And so I think our key recommendation is going to be, we recognize there is research that shows that crime data drops. However, A, you need to make sure the things you're doing actually do drop the crime rate, and B, drop the crime rate in a way that is useful and desirable as compared to the bad thing that you're doing by stopping all of these people. I think one of the other recommendations of this section has to be done in consultation with the people you're policing.
Yeah.
And which Nicole definitely goes to in one of her other recommendations.
But the statistics also suggest that the number of stops being by the African Americans and white drivers, you are actually finding more contraband among the white drivers. So, and if we're talking, but we're doing much more investigative stops toward the African American drivers. So my thought is, if there was policing going on in other communities at the rate that it's going on in the African American community, and the number of investigative stops that we see that are taking place in the minority community, and just by the bare numbers, the raw numbers, it suggests that when you're talking about the contraband and people who are actually getting caught with contraband, is the white drivers. So I would think that if you were policing those communities as heavily as your community, and you're looking to reduce crime, and the numbers already suggest that you have more white drivers getting caught with contraband than you do African American drivers, then maybe you should be policing the white communities more if that's what you really want to do, is reduce the crime, because the higher rates of contraband is coming from the white drivers, not the black drivers.
Absolutely.
But that's true. What you say is true nationally, but according to Paul's statistics, it's not true in Urbana. In Urbana, the rate of contraband is higher among black drivers who are searched.
Because they're being stopped at a higher rate.
No, per stop.
I thought that my understanding of the stop is because,
Paul, is that correct? I'm sorry.
I didn't see that.
Yeah,
I
I
thought
thought-
I read where it was
thought-
the white drivers. I thought I just
If-
read
If I'm
that.
wrong, I take it back, but I thought that's what I remembered seeing in
I thought I
policy.
just
And
read.
noting it as a
I
difference.
read
Paul,
it somewhere.
hold on, Paul, please.
Yeah, Paul's looking it up, I think.
So, first, the number of stops in which contraband is found at all is very small relative to the total number of stops. And then, I think it varies somewhat from year to year, but it seems as if sort of, I guess what I would say is the percent of, total contraband is, of the total stops in which contraband is found, the rates are roughly equal. In some
Yeah.
years it's higher for African Americans, some years it's higher for whites, and it varies somewhat by the type of stop.
That was my memory as well of
Yeah,
the
okay.
statistics.
So-
That-
So it's about even, now, the national figures are as you say, Trish. And in fact, it's gonna be one thing that I'm working on, is pointing out
Okay.
some of the ways in which the national figures are different from the local figures. But I guess the local figures are, I must have just looked at, the most recent year or something like that.
Yeah.
And if I may, I think your central point is exactly right, by the way. And it goes to increased policing. Dropping the crime rate is race independent. You could come up with drops of crime rates by dumping a bunch of police officers into white communities and making that policing absolutely excruciating, and you drop the crime rate there too.
That's right.
And but we don't do that.
We don't do that, and that's so that
so-
plays right back into this biased policing. And I really struggle. I really struggle with this because we always come back to reducing crime rates. We're talking about traffic stop, not crime stops. This is where I have so much problem with this, is that this is traffic stops, not crime stops. Shouldn't there be some difference? Oh, so are we sending out our patrol officers to patrol specifically to reduce crime? Or, if they're just driving around looking, in traffic, doing traffic stops, then you would think that the numbers would be more in line.
So
So we're talking about these investigative stops.
And to answer your question, I think what Andy has reported from the police department, and absolutely consistently, is yes, we are specifically having officers do traffic stops in order to do investigation. That is absolutely part of what the police department is, what the policy currently is. And I think by way of our recommendations, we have to, and we do have national statistics which say, okay, engaging in that kind of policy will of course reduce crime rates, but we don't have statistics from here that says that the kinds of investigatory stops we're doing, hello Chandra, are helping with that. Oh, now we have a quorum.
But the Office of DOJ would suggest that also increases bias policing.
Absolutely. And that's why I think our recommendations need to be clear that if the police department chooses to do this, they're going to have to collect statistics and show that it's doing something good. They're going to have to do it with the permission of the community that is being policed. And they are going to have to take into account the negative impacts that kind of policing will result in.
Right.
I think, now speaking, well, actually, let me pause. We are now about to go. Can I hold you for just a minute so we can do our official business? Then I'll let you escape and we can continue on. But while we've got a quorum here, I I'd like to at least get our minutes approved. I presume, Durrell, if you want to, you're the only one who would be here to give public input, you're okay with not doing that in front of a quorum if Alejandra has to leave? Okay, so I just want to quickly, oh, did we even get minutes?
June 3rd, we were taking a special.
We have minutes.
I think so. Well, didn't you distribute them in the packet?
Chairman Reed,
And I didn't-
it was.
Yeah, they were
We did,
distributed in the
okay.
packet.
It was.
We didn't print off copies of it.
Yeah.
So we have a quorum present. Can I get a motion for approval of our last minutes?
I move to approve the June 3rd minutes.
I'll second that motion.
All right, so I have a motion by Paul, a second by Eric. Any changes? Yes, he did include the minutes on the website. Good. Any changes to the minutes? Any comments? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right,
I
that motion.
oppose. I've never opposed a motion. So.
That's why you opposed?
Yeah, just for the record.
Just for form.
So I can get the full
There you
task
go.
force experience.
Todd,
Stand for
you can
democracy.
put in the record one opposed, and we moved on with our agenda. There for posterity. Okay, let's go to old business, and I think, Alejandra, do you have anything else for us formally? I will let you escape. We will continue with our formal business.
And enjoy your vacation.
And I will send you email to get you to give a quick look to the stuff that we do produce.
Okay.
But I appreciate it.
Have fun.
Why don't we've been talking about this in terms of police procedure. Why don't we continue that discussion if, Paul, you're okay delaying for just a little bit? And I want to go for, I think what we should do is go for another 15 minutes,
Yeah.
allow any public input, and then if we continue on from there, with any last minute business or announcements, if people can stay longer. Eric, please.
Yeah, I would like actually to, for sort of informal approval or encouragement to draft an additional recommendation.
Okay.
And the additional recommendation to the council would be to consider means to equalize economic impact by considering differential fines based on economic status. And I'm keying off of
That's
the
it.
document
That's the one.
that I
That you
sent
sent.
around. Now, I don't think we would have easy access to people's income, but we have immediate and easy access to the value of their cars.
Mm.
So that we could key the fines to the value of the car, use that as a proxy for economic status. So that would reduce the impact on low income people.
So I
So,
can.
I'd like to pass this on to the city council to wrestle with that.
So what I had in my summary recommendations at the moment on this topic, and I think I can generalize to catch this too, what I had was the city council should review the disproportional economic impacts of citations for traffic violations and examine changes that might ameliorate those impacts. For example, fines for different traffic violations should be reviewed with an eye toward reducing fines that disproportionately impact the African American and Latino communities.
Sure, and now Todd really finds what my suggestion outlandish or something.
No, it's just, I think you need to be cautious because
Yeah.
the suggestion assumes that there is a one-to-one correlation when you compare African-American drivers and white drivers between their rate of income and the value of the cars
Oh,
that
yeah,
they select.
there is it, yeah, and I definitely
And
think,
if that doesn't exist, then you're actually going to end up disproportionately impacting African-Americans.
because, yeah, so maybe we ought to collect the statistics on the value of the car versus
Or if there's something that we can find that is a more straightforward indicator that's obvious.
Yeah,
I-
yeah, yeah.
You know, that could be presented to the city council. But I think generalizing our recommendation to say you want to lessen economic impact.
Yeah, we want to lessen disparate economic impact.
And
How you do.
if we can come up with some way to present that to city council with a straight recommendation, and I suspect, like Todd does, that doing it on value of the car is probably not gonna be a good meter.
Yeah,
But Chandra,
I was
please.
just gonna say that, the economic impact, if we think about it or even have it presented, has nothing to do with the value of the car, it's what's going on outside of their driving. So, for example, if you get tacked on interest rates, so the longer your car is in the impound or whatever, that is gonna have economic impact on the
Right.
person who's working at a job that may not be,
It's
up
minimum.
to, where it's a minimum wage job
Right.
versus someone who is making
Yeah.
6 figures. But even the person that makes 6 figures, those traffic stops are still impacting, there is an economic impact because of the fees that are tacked on. And I think if you just deal with just that, that would keep us from, one, stereotyping and putting people
yeah.
stereotyping, but also it will present the facts of how it's truly impacting.
Okay, so, yeah, so let's figure out, let's ask, I mean, if we put the recommendation in, then we can get both public and committee member input into how to measure that economic impact, into things that might go into an ordinance on a fee schedule that would,
So
have that
the one-
effect.
I
and so
also
forth.
have another-
Yeah.
Paul and then Patricia.
So the one thing I'd say that jumps out from the court fine data is that, the most frequent charge of any is operating an uninsured motor vehicle, right? And to the extent that the city can explore ways of helping people who might not get car insurance, I think
Right.
it should. And there are states that have programs that have, low income health or, programs to support if you're below a certain income level, can enroll in insurance that costs less, has a lower sort of, deductible or what's the word that you,
Yeah, the state makes you
Premium.
get
Yeah.
that SR 22s or whatever it is, but they're much higher rated. If the city could provide something
Yeah.
similar to what the state does at a lower rate, then that would be helpful.
and like one way that, that might make this feasible, because I think Detroit has looked into this, is that you could say, well, let's maybe partner with other towns in or in Illinois that have a similar size and maybe a similar problem, so that you have a bigger insurance market, so an insurer could say, oh yeah, we'd like to have more customers. It could be a win-win. But to me, that seems like a policy goal we should encourage.
Okay, so that's a real, yeah, so we should, maybe, okay, so this would fall under the umbrella of ways to reduce. And I don't know if you want to write in, examples, but.
I think the two things that, I'm sorry, Patricia, you had something on the table first, yes.
Because the thing that I've been thinking about probably kind of go right along with your line of thinking is that what is the rate of unemployment? Because see, you have a higher rate of African American men, African Americans, period, but especially African American males, unemployment rates are very high. And even though they're unemployed, that doesn't stop them from driving. But that might increase the likelihood that they can't afford the insurance or whatnot. So I would like to also look at that data too, Paul. I mean, in terms of the likelihood of what is the number of uninsured drivers, and what is the rate of unemployed?
Unemployment versus
unemployment rate.
insurance.
Well,
So,
the unemployment rate. I'd like to see what that is too.
Patricia, I'm curious to know, do you want that to, cause what that could do is like bring up even more stuff. How is a way we could streamline it to say, according to the unemployment rate or whatever, here is how the fees
Yeah, can really have.
can
that
impact it and,
Right.
and kind of
That's right.
streamline it
That's
versus
right.
saying we need the data, because then we're gonna be asking to look for more data in this area, and I
Well,
don't
and
think
I mean, it
that.
could be adding to the unemployed,
So-
the uninsured, right?
I want to make sure I'm scribbling down some notes here. I want to make sure that I've got in my head who's doing what. So I hear some piece of the community impact talking about lower incomes, lower employment rates, and how those economic impacts are higher. I'm also hearing that in the police procedure public engagement, by way of recommendations, that we're going to say the city council should look to lessen the economic impact and to try to key things to the income and employment situation of the people who are getting those citations, as well as maybe a direct recommendation of, because one of the the highest rates of citation is for lack of insurance, to look into some sort of insurance program that the city could assist with.
And I'm sorry for interrupting.
Go right ahead.
This is a substantive point. The other thing that probably is compounding the differential financially is if you look at the number of charges by race, the rate for African Americans is just blowing the rate of multiple charges out of the water for everyone else proportionally. And so African Americans, when they're getting stopped, they're just getting more charges, which are more tickets to pay, which is a greater financial impact.
Right.
And you
Which
can-
is something that can be addressed directly through police procedure, and it's a pretty easy fix.
Right, so, and that goes to Nicole's recommendation of get the citation proportionality sane, which I think, everything I've heard as we've had this discussion over the past few weeks has been, we are absolutely all on board with whatever you're doing with traffic stops themselves, the number of stops, and you need to engage with the community about if you're gonna have more of them in certain neighborhoods, that's
So-
something. But no matter what, the citation rate should be proportional, and the fine rate should be keyed to the economic impact that it's having. Paul, go ahead.
Just on that issue, I think we've only talked about, or I've only talked about sort of citation rates, in the aggregate, right? And I think part of what drives that is that different racial groups are pulled over for different reasons. That, moving or license plate registration is much more common among Hispanics, equipment violations among Hispanics and African Americans. And so if you look just at like the moving violation, African Americans and whites are cited, get tickets 66% of the time essentially. But the differences really arise in these other types of stops, these equipment stops, where African Americans get a ticket 44% of the time, whereas Asians it's only 14%, or whites it's only 25%. And similarly for license plate and registration, Hispanics receive a ticket 81% of the time, African Americans 56% of the time, Asians 50%, and whites 43%. And part of that is that there are different types of stops within these categories, but part of it is that, why, like, if the citation rates are, somewhat comparable for moving violations, but really different among equipment and license plate.
Sure, the citation rates per stop are roughly equivalent between African Americans and whites.
For moving
But
violations.
For moving violations, but the moving violation stops per capita. If you're an African American, you are much more likely to get a ticket for a moving violation than if you are white. Nevertheless, all the evidence is that whites and African Americans drive roughly equivalently safely.
Yeah.
So, the moving violation rate per stop should be lower for African Americans because the moving violation rate per capita should be similar because whites and African Americans, so the equivalent safety thing that I'm talking about is actually accident rates. Accident rates per driver so African Americans and whites have about the same number of accidents. Yet, African Americans are being ticketed much more often for moving violations than whites. So that's a disparity that should probably,
Wait,
reasonably should go away.
I have a question. I'm not understanding something. So Paul's data shows that the disparity for African Americans versus whites in moving violations stops, just stops.
Yeah, moving,
Violation stops. African Americans are stopped 25% more likely. Okay, so that's a straight up disparity. Once you divide by stops, the fine rates, the citation rates for African Americans are equivalent, if I understand the data correctly.
right.
So we've got two moving pieces here, and I
Right.
just want to make sure that I've got a handle on what you're saying. You're saying we need to put in something about addressing the 25% increased rate of stops because studies show that accident rates are equivalent.
No, I'm saying we ought to address the disparities in tickets issued for moving violations.
They're, as far as I can tell, they're,
But there's an over-selection in the very sort of selection process of who you're stopping.
yes,
So
yes.
comparatively, they're just, African Americans are being over-selected
Right.
in that population where the actual ticketing is equal.
That I absolutely understand. Okay,
They're
that-
overrepresented.
Yeah, so let's assume
And
that Todd
then
and I
once they're
are,
stopped, they're having multiple citations.
Right.
That's
That's
where
the
the
other
problem.
Right,
Yeah.
so,
And they're having penalties and fees because they have less social or less economic ability to
And-
actually.
And then they're also being stopped more frequently for license plate registration and
Insurance.
equipment,
Now-
and where
And
those are, and
Well, you know,
they're the
there-
disparity in
there's a
citations.
news.
okay, hold on, hold on, hold on,
Right.
hold on.
Okay.
I want to make sure we stay on track here, and I
Okay.
want to get Daryl's comments in just a minute here. So, I'm hearing that you've got some community impact stuff that you can get out of Paul's data about exactly this specific topic. And my community
hoping
impact
we
writers
can-
are smiling at each other. Good.
We can work on
Okay,
that.
so you all can work on getting that.
Can you pull that piece out for me, Chandra?
Pardon me?
Can you pull that piece out? That impact?
And Eric,
Economic.
you've got already pointers to accident rate equivalences.
Yeah,
From your research. So forward that to Patricia and Chandra so that you can sort of connect the dots for everybody. Accident rates are the same, so that the moving violation should be the same. I'm sorry.
You know,
go
the
ahead.
other thing you can look at is the step data.
And
Step
The
data,
step data
yeah.
is pure traffic safety.
although the
Yeah.
step data does have non-moving violation, so it's got equipment violation.
Right, but that
mixed
gives you a
in.
much purer estimate of driving patterns and behavior.
That's where that 25%
Yeah,
additional
I saw
number
that
comes
in
from,
the
though. We
report.
still do have a disparity, even in the step data.
Right. But it's not as bad.
But it's not as bad.
It's not nearly as bad.
Okay, so that's gonna go in there, and then I hear the recommendations that have to go into the community impact. And Chandra, I don't know if you saw your email before you got to the meeting, but Nicole had to go in for a medical procedure, so she hasn't been able to get her report. So I was going to also be begging you for help this weekend with putting together that section of the report.
Okay.
So after the meeting, we will talk offline about how torn apart Patricia and I are going to make you by yanking each one of your arms. But we'll get that done. Okay, so I want to at least get Daryl's input. I know I am. Robert would be rolling over in his grave at this moment, given my control of the order of this meeting, but I do want to get public input before people start sneaking out the door. So Daryl, would you like to give us any public input at this point?
Yes, I could. I wasn't planning to, but I did see the summary of recommendations, and I would like to speak very quickly to that.
Yeah, please.
Yeah. If you look at the recommendations, basically it says the city council should, police department should, the police department should, city council and police department, and so on down
Are
through.
these in the codes?
And I would
That's in
suggest that
Oh.
there needs to be a recommendation that involves some formal or ongoing process that includes public oversight of the future process of reviewing and monitoring this. We cannot just leave it to the police department to do it. And I question whether we can leave it solely to the city council, because I don't know that this is going to be an extremely high priority of the city council when you get into the details, especially monitoring it and looking at it over a period of years. Things seem to get lost. So if there's some way the task force could incorporate some means where the public, either through the Human Relations Commission or some other sort of committee that could be set up so the public can be engaged and participate in this process, I think would be helpful. I would also like to suggest, I don't know how you can do this, but I think, and I firmly believe that racial disparities in traffic stops are directly related to the last 25 years on the war on drugs. And everything I've read, even though you can't specifically pinpoint it, it started then. The type of policing that goes on, the investigatory stops, you read the stops, you read the citations, looking for contraband, you look at pulled over. If there's some way, because I think that becomes the way we have been policing our community, and that emphasis on the war on drugs has focused on the African American community more so than any other racial group. And I think that is a myth, that that's the only problem, the drug problems exist, but it's the focus and understanding that has been accepted by the community. If there was some way to incorporate the idea of the war on drugs in terms of how we police in some way to explain that, I think that would be important, and I think pulled over covers that, and there's numerous sources to that. I would take exception to Eric's comments earlier. I understand where you're coming from when you say more traffic stops reduces the crime rate. There are some studies out there, and my understanding is they're not the most recent ones. They may be 10, 12 years old, and there's and it depends who's doing that study or whatever. But I would suggest in pulled over in other sources, they're looking at current data, and they're really questioning whether traffic stops reduce crime or exercising them. I don't think that's a fact, and I'd be very careful about making that statement in your report. If it's made in there, I will question it and ask this task force to document that that's unequivocal, because I don't think it is. And I think the issue is that police have used traffic stops as a way of thinking they're reducing crime, when in fact they haven't used other approaches that can reduce crime without having the negative racial impact or disparity that's there. And they aren't willing to consider alternative ways of fighting crime other than through investigatory stops. That's the conclusion of Pulled Over. And if you read that book, it kind of hits that nail pretty clearly. So I would like to suggest maybe, and I know these are just recommendations, and I appreciate your comments in terms of how you're framing them, but I'm wondering if the task force might just consider suggesting the Urbana Police Department have a 6-month moratorium on investigatory stops unless they are clearly responding to crime, to track during that period of time how stops are racially come out and if crime goes up or down. Do a little study for 6 months or 10 months and encourage them to do something like that to see. Because I would suggest that other communities that have done that or tried that you may find you can maintain a safe community, you can fight crime without doing racially biased policing tactics that are currently in place. So I would like to see, consider encouraging some type of recommendation like that is maybe just a experiment, you know, it's an objective sort of thing without any bias. Just collect the data and see what happens. So those are my few suggestions that I'd like to see in the recommendations.
I will only partially break my own rule about not commenting to say
Thank you.
thank you. Several of them are incredibly well taken, and I will take on specifically. Any questions for Daryl on these?
Yeah, why don't you send me the bulk of the data, the bulk of the statistical studies that I have seen support, you know, what I have said. And I did read, pulled over. But if you feel that there are, you know, that there are good studies with good statistics that run counter to what I've suggested, you know, please do point me at those.
I'm gonna make a comment and phrase it in the form of a question. Is that,
I will only come down on you with my gavel
This was a
if it
request,
gets.
so I hope it counts as a question.
I will try and refrain from my use of my giant gavel.
which is just to your first point that, you know, we have all of this data that's used to conduct the statistical analysis. We can easily anonymize that data, so there's no name, address, anything that would identify drivers or officers, and then post that and the code used to produce our analysis, and then suggest, you know, if the council does hire some sort of statistician or some sort of, you know, consultant to, you know, conduct this ongoing analysis, that part of their job should be making this data available to the public, and making that code, and so trying to make this as transparent as possible and as easy for you know, as many interested parties to work with it as possible, because I think this data is, in theory, all publicly available. You could spend the time and FOIA it and get it, and so why, you know, if we remove that barrier, I don't see any cost to that, or, you know, maybe there are costs that I, as in my own way, don't have. So would that
have that open data tool?
We
Yeah.
do, and as a matter of fact, there's a very new website now on the Urbana website where they are putting out a tremendous amount of data. Did you want to pose this a question to
So
Earl?
would that satisfy part of your?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
Well done, thank you. And Patricia, you had a question for Daryl.
I absolutely think that we should try to address this fictitious war on drugs, which we think is reducing crime, when it doesn't match up to the reports that we get at our community coalition, where we have reports from all of our chief of police that say the biggest crimes that are being perpetrated are burglaries, people
Car
breaking into cars, breaking into houses. Of course, now we've had an increase in gun violence, but I haven't heard anything about any increase in stops that's pulling any guns out of cars. So, I mean, these are the reports that we're getting straight from our chiefs of police. So how is stopping traffic reducing crime? That is, I mean, stopping cars, reducing the crimes that are being reported by our chiefs of police. Now, somebody needs to tell me where that data, it just doesn't make sense, because they don't say that they stopped this burglary, this person was driving down the street and I caught them in driving after they left someone's home or broke into somebody's car. If that's where the crimes are, then it has nothing to do with these traffic stops. And it doesn't reduce crime. The crimes are being reported. We've got gun violence, we've got
burglaries, we've got car thefts. This is what's being reported. So actually, this is
Before we go on, I just want to give Daryl one opportunity
So I
to
think
answer the rhetorical questions
this
that Patricia
fictitious
posted.
war on drugs.
Would you like to take a minute, or do you?
No, I think she's hit the nail right on the head.
Oh,
Traffic
so-
stops
I-
relate to war on drugs. Pure
Yeah.
and simple, not other
So-
crime.
Thank you. So having
where the
completed-
numbers are high.
Having completed public input, I just want to go back to, before I let you go, and mention, and again, I'm trying to be very pragmatic about our use of time today. Eric had a section in his report about the war on drugs, and you sort of put it in as, we should really try and get this in somehow. And along with our public comment now, and it's sounding like there's at least a little, we should figure out some way to get this in. My sense is this is best in the community impact section, but I'm not positive. Todd, do you have a recommendation, since you look like you've thought about this?
I think that this goes to the core of what you're seeing in the disparities, and I think there has to be at least some mention of it in the introduction,
In the executive summary section.
and in the recommendations. There needs to be a recommendation regarding
Okay,
So,
the council's review of the results of the drug war.
go ahead, Eric.
so I have had a preliminary conversation with Aaron about an idea that we think at what might be the right time we would bring up to the council for a discussion item. And this is to recommend a suspension of all marijuana dealing with any marijuana laws in Urbana. Just
Suspension of cannabis enforcement.
suspension of cannabis
I
enforcement.
like that.
And so we will, I would,
That goes toward the investigative stops too.
yeah, so what this would imply is if the officer finds cannabis, he doesn't care, he doesn't do anything about it. And I guess what really prompted me to talk to Aaron about it is there was a guy who got busted who lives on Smith Street in Urbana. Not a person I know, but there was a picture, so I know he's African American, who was arrested at work. They had gotten a tip, they had found marijuana in his home. Fairly large amount, they found a pound of it, so he was probably dealing. But it was only marijuana, not heroin, not anything else. And so he was, arrested while he was at work. He's, employed. And I got to thinking about what the hell is happening to this guy's life, his family, everything, over a drug that in another context we recognize as legal, because we've got medical marijuana now, and that we haven't really identified as being any more harmful than alcohol or tobacco. So it was in that context that I said, Aaron, hey, what do you think about that? And he, as you might predict, he's not really opposed to that. So I wonder if we would. I don't know about recommending that specifically.
So let me make this suggestion by way of a way forward. I know Chandra's been working on sort of a context setting portion of the introduction, which we're going to include. Including a small bit, and by context setting, what I wrote to Chandra when we were talking about this was, okay, we've got to say at some level in this report, we recognize the existence of Ferguson and Baltimore and North Charleston.
That's going to be
and
part of my report too.
and so we've got to have at least a paragraph at the top level and in the body, but at the top level saying, we recognize all this is going on, we don't want that to happen here, and even though traffic stops seem like a minor thing compared to the things that went on there, that's what leads to that progression. Mentioning the war on drugs in a short way in that section might work. Getting some additional discussion of it in community impact, and I think a generalized recommendation along the lines of that police department and city council should review policies regarding, or review ordinances, whatever, regarding enforcement of different kinds of drug offenses to see if it can lower the disparate impact. I'll try and come up with wording for the recommendation that's a little sort of broad and general and gives the city council the opportunity to use this idea or others as they may come up.
Yeah, I would not, I would not support the experiment that Darrell is suggesting, but I would support, I absolutely would support, and maybe we could find common ground on this, an experiment in which we would, for some period of time, like a year, not enforce cannabis laws at all, and see.
That's gonna be a harder sell than
heavy
a
lift,
moratorium on investigative stops, don't you think?
Well,
'Cause
look,
I think
I'm a
it
very
worked. They
data-driven
worked.
person. I think a moratorium on investigative stops would result in an increase in crime that would really
Well,
hurt
let's put it
people.
through the test.
But it's been done. That experiment, that
Not in
control.
Urbana?
No, not in Urbana, but it's been done in other cities where they sort of went a checkerboard, where they did hotspot policing in some areas and not in others. And I can't support that because I believe that people would really get
I think
hurt.
you can still do your hotspot policing. I
But-
think to limit the investigative stops is something different than, because when you do the hotspot policing, there's a specific reason that you are in that community, that you are policing that community, which is very different than these investigative stops.
So
Very different. So
I'm-
I would hope you would consider that. I thought that was an excellent idea.
I'm going to try and write up a recommendation that tries to finesse down the middle of this particular
Yeah.
argument on investigative stops. I think the sort of high-level summary I gave, where the police department needs to start doing some studying of whether they're actually having positive impact by doing the kinds of investigative stops they're doing, is something that we can probably all agree to. And how they do that study and whether that study involves a moratorium or maybe different parts of the community or engaging with the community, and I will try and come up with some recommendation that walks down this line and see how far we can get. But I
Soberly.
I have taken it all in, and I appreciate that where we are going with this. This is good direction for recommendation. So I think we've got marching orders on the recommendations that Durrell and others have given here. I like the direction this is going. So let's do a bit of logistics before we wrap up. And Paul, do you have enough? I saw the updates you did to the report to address Nicole's comments. I thought they were very good. I understand you still have a little bit more by way of commentary you want to put in on the later graphs.
So yeah, I think in general, Nicole's comments were really helpful for highlighting places where the sort of summary was unclear and
She did a good job.
yeah, and so hopefully this current version is a little more straightforward. It was written a little late at night, so you find
I won't mention the time that I got the email from Paul, but I was still awake when he sent it. So
oh, great. Kindred spirits. But so I will copy edit, but if other people, find things, please let me know, and I will try to change that. If there's language that you dislike or things that are just patently unclear, please let me know. And then I just want to go through this sort of all the tables and figures at the end, just kind of create a uniform kind of format and some context and explanation of what everything shows. But so in my mind, that is an appendix and something that we can make available.
okay, good.
But
And I personally read through your changes. They look spot on.
Can you get me some unemployment stats?
So-
I would like to kind of use a little bit of that.
I can
in
look
my
to see.
in my impact report.
I know like the Bureau of Labor Statistics has unemployment by like county and some metropolitan. So I'm not sure how close we can get to
We get
Urbana.
very close, because I think that, they got, over at the Department of Employment, I know that I talked to, I think his name is Rick Crandall,
Okay.
over on Mattis. He's at the the ID, the workforce, WorkNet, whatever it is over there on Mattis, whatever the building
You've
is
talked
called.
to him recently?
Not recently, but I
He's
have to.
retired.
He's gone now?
Yeah.
Oh, I did not know that.
I will look into
But
that.
there was somebody, I know that he was one that I would call on for data, because he would collect the unemployment data for this area. So someone over there has that information.
Okay. Is this the
But
Illinois
then
Department
you
of Employment
do-
Security, or? And
Yes,
do you think they'll have that data by race as well?
yes,
Okay.
yes, they do.
Excellent.
So, okay,
And then maybe you can do me a little graph.
I'll shoot. Yeah.
Whatever.
you need to run.
I need-
And
Thank you, Eric.
You've got marching orders for this weekend. You will see emails,
Yes.
I'm sure, fly by. So,
Yes, right. Okay,
thank you,
good.
sir.
Thank you.
And thank you for staying late.
You think we can't get 4 or 5 votes on Urbana City Council
Oh.
for suspending enforcement of cannabis laws?
So, before you run out the door, meeting next week. The city council is not meeting on
I think
Monday.
there's
We
a
could
shot.
do it then. Do we have time this afternoon to
Well,
send
try
out
that.
an
I think it'd
announcement?
be great, 'cause that
Yeah, we'll look at that.
will
I wonder
Slow
whether
down.
Tony already
Set it up for
reserved
Tuesday?
Wednesday.
That might be a way to.
What- Tuesday is our drop dead day, supposedly.
All right, well, I'll check with him about
Okay.
that.
Stop.
So, Monday or Tuesday night,
Mm-hmm.
we're gonna meet up, we're gonna try and meet up to approve what we come up with over the weekend.
Okay, when are we submitting this to the council's meeting?
Tuesday,
July the,
Tuesday is the day that the preliminary report is due. And
Okay.
before you came, I had already mentioned, this is the preliminary report that's going out for public comment. So we've got another edit pass on this, which
Okay.
is why I haven't been in full-out panic that we're not done. But we do need something substantive to give them on Tuesday. So, so we will meet up early next week and hopefully vote it out. And I will be beating the bushes to make sure we have a quorum for
So for the people
Monday
here,
or Tuesday.
would it be better to do that at 5:30 or at noon?
On Monday or Tuesday.
and, or 5:30,
On Monday I can do noon. On Tuesday I teach from 11.
Okay.
Monday noon.
Why don't, have Tony send
We'll
out and do a quick poll to see if people can make either one of
Got
those.
it 2:00, guys.
Okay. Does anybody else need particular bits of information? Paul, I think you're pretty much set to go. If you can provide it to me in Word format, that would
I
make
sent
life
you.
perfect.
But I will send you an update. The charts, tables, and figures are probably easier for me at least to
In
produce
PDF.
as a PDF. Just,
That's fine. I can tack that into a Word document, so long as their appendices are
Yeah.
just separable. You're gonna work
I'm working.
over the weekend.
Working. I have
Are you
nothing
working
but
over the
time.
weekend? Okay. Is there anything else that we need to do?
Good, I'm up all night today.
Okay, it sounds like we have a path forward. Let's adjourn for now. We will meet up early next week, hopefully with something to say, yeah, that's good enough for public comment.